outside the Royal Geographical Centre, and we're here to interview Alex Hibbert, who's the leader of the Dark Ice Project.
Now, the Dark Ice Project is going to take them 300 days to do this trek to the North Pole, and the difference is it's in the polar winter, which means it's going to be in the complete darkness.
Let's go inside and see him.
Thanks for joining us today in this interview. Could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're doing this expedition?
Sure. Well, I grew up in Hampshire, down on the south coast, and then when I was about 17, 18, I started putting together some plans for polar projects and polar expeditions. I did my first major expedition in 2008, which became known as the Long Haul, and that was a nearly 4-month expedition unsupported on the Greenland ice cap. And my plan for this winter and for the winter following is to complete what I call the Dark Ice Project, which is, the plan is to complete the first ever unsupported expedition to the North Pole in winter.
Wow. So what's different between this expedition and any other before?
Well, this is going to be technically very, very different to what I've done before, in that we're moving on fractured sea ice, and we're also travelling in the dark, and so they're going to be two of the major problems. But also completely different to an ice cap expedition. We have a lot of different challenges, such as polar bears and ice which breaks up, open water that we have to cross, and so a completely different set of skills than you would require on a different expedition.
So your first part, you say, because I've read about the first phase.
Yes.
So can you explain about that and what you're actually doing? To us that doesn't have a clue about this kind of thing, what are you doing on that first phase?
Okay, so there are a number of strategies. But the first strategy that we're planning is to do the first phase, which is depot laying. So we're going to be starting from Qaanaaq village, which is an Inuit hunting village on the northwest coast of Greenland. And then we're going to go from there all the way up the Nares Strait in between Canada and Greenland, up to the edge of the Arctic Ocean, right at the top of where land on the earth exists. And then we'll lay very, very large depots of food and fuel all the way up there. And that's going to be very, very slow and very laborious, and we'll come back via that same route. And the next phase, on the second part of the expedition, the next winter, we'll then go up and move very quickly between those depots. And then as we get to the edge of the Arctic Ocean, we'll then be ready to, early in the season, go for the North Pole and then potentially return. But because it's such a difficult expedition, most are very simple these days. It's from A to B, and it's done over a very short time period. But I do think a little bit differently. Yeah. So this is a very long-term expedition, trying to do something which is quite a long way beyond what's been tried before.
So how do you prepare for something like this? You know, obviously there's physical and there's mental. And how long does that take?
To put the whole plan together, I'm constantly planning modifications on kit and different systems all the time. So this expedition has been planned properly for the last year, but the idea was in the back of my head for years now. It simply depends on circumstance which of my ideas in the back of my head end up in the front of my head and become my next project.
And in terms of the prep, you know, mentally, how do you prepare for this and physically, you know, nutrition and training?
Nutrition is very, very important, and so alongside the training I also have to eat all the right things. And so at the moment I'm now starting to eat more fat before I go away, because our diet's going to be quite fat heavy, and your body needs to know how to handle that before you go away, otherwise you can end up having stomach upsets and various things like that. And then the training simply builds up and builds up from normal up until the time I go.
So I'm thinking North Pole, polar bears.
Right.
What happens in that scenario? Are there going to be loads of polar bears there? Or how do you prepare for that?
There is a very large bear population there. The North Pole is actually quite rare to get bears there because it's a very long way from land, and they tend to stick reasonably close to land on the sea ice of coastal regions. And so although there has been a polar bear seen at the North Pole, they tend to be a lot further south. And so our main problem is going to be actually this season going up the Nares Strait. It's one of the most heavily populated areas of polar bears in the world. And so we're going to have to be very careful to not accidentally walk around a large block of ice and find one on the other side hunting. And so we've got a lot of preparations to make sure that we don't have too many problems with them. To try and, first of all, let them know that we're there at a distance, that we don't scare them and there's not a confrontation. But also, if there is a confrontation, we are very close, or they get very curious about our food or about our sledges, we are able to defend ourselves.
Wow. So if you, obviously we are like beginners and we love adventure, but we are not your level at all, how would we, you know, start preparing or doing something a bit adventure-like?
I think the first thing to do is try and do things on your own. Don't try and always jump on board an existing project, because I think you learn so much more if you put your own plans together. So there's no need to jump into the Arctic Ocean as your first expedition.
I don't think so.
But you can start small, but I would say that it's better to to do a very, very small project on your own and learn how all the different factors need to come together to build up a project, rather than trying to do something a bit bigger and simply rely on other people to organise it for you. So I'd say it's learning the art of organising expeditions.
I mean, because there's things like cold. How do you prepare yourself for being that cold?
Mentally, you don't. You simply forget about it until the moment that it happens, and you just put up with it. Then, before that, you simply make sure you've got the right clothing system. So you've got lots of layers which you can use to modify how warm you are. The worst thing, as well as being cold, is being too hot, because then you sweat and then that gets cold and you stop, and you get in a horrible cycle of being freezing cold. And so it's simply learning and having the best clothing system set up.
And this is your tent,
That's right.
that you're going to be...
It's a slightly new style,
Yeah, so could you tell us a little bit about this?
Okay, well, 99.9% of polar expeditions involve tunnel tents, so very, very low tents which are long and thin, and the wind is supposed to blow down the length of it. The problem is they're very unstable when the wind changes, whereas these, obviously it's a teepee, so it's a completely ancient style of living in a tent. It's a new concept in polar expeditions, and so the plan is that we're going to be using this throughout instead of the tunnel tent. It's breathable, so it allows some of the condensation and some of the steam from a stove to pass through it without causing lots of icing up. And also, no matter where the wind comes from, the hope is that it will be as stable in any direction as it would be from any other. And so if the wind does change, we won't be knocked over. Also, we can stand up inside, so that's quite nice.
How long does it take you to pitch this tent in those conditions?
In big, heavy, difficult, undexterous mitts, we've got it up and down in 3 minutes.
3 minutes?
Yeah.
So
I think that
from
would
being
take
packed away to
like
and then
1 hour
to do that.
It's practice.
Fantastic.
So for us, if we were like go back into us doing a little mini expedition, because we said within like a day or 24 hours, what challenge would you set us?
I would say look quite close to home. There are loads of places in the UK which can get quite wild. Brecon Beacons, Dartmoor, the Scottish Highlands, are fantastic places. Or within maybe a day's travel of where we live, the Alps, Norway, Iceland, there are loads of places quite near to the UK, quite easy to get to, quite cheap to get to, where you can have a little bit of adventure. The key is to make sure that you're prepared properly. People know where you're going, and they know what to do if there is a problem or if you lose contact.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks so much for talking to us, Alex. You know, all the best on your trip, and hopefully I'll get to talk to you when you get back.
Yeah, we look forward to interviewing your success.
Thank you very much. I'll be a bit thinner.